All right, good morning, everyone. It's Thursday here at 10:45. We're going to go ahead and get started with our agenda here with lead for today. And before we do so, we had a reminder this week, I believe it was on Tuesday, that we get pretty focused on protocols, guidance, and especially around COVID in a shortened season or a compacted season here yet. We have things like emergency procedures that are in place. And we had Minnetonka High School went through a very unfortunate situation on Tuesday night that turned out much better than it could have. So kudos for our schools and for the work that you continue to do in managing events. And unfortunately, those are things that still occur when we have a spectator in this case. And what is the emergency action plan? And the emergency action plan was followed. And kudos to Ted Schultz and Minnetonka High School for the work that they did this week during the events. And again, it's just a reminder of everything else that can occur and can happen. So that is something that we know that happens at our games. And thank you for the work that you're doing outside of COVID as well. That being said, our agenda here for this week, as we look at items we want to help you with, and I'm going to turn it over quickly here to Laura very quickly. Just resources, as we get questions on many of the resources or documents that we have for you, where they're located, how to find them on the website. So, and then also around incident reports, something that liaisons asked for and schools have asked for. We'll talk to you about that. Just where we're at with contest management and questions that are coming up to assist you as you're managing those events. Jody's going to update us on return to sport and how that relates to bylaw 107 again. And just a progression of upcoming communication. Everybody is looking for those concrete postseason dates and spring dates and when we're going to get information around guidance for spring. We'll give you an update on that. And remember, we have a board meeting next week. So we'll give you some of those dates. Postseason itself, we're going to give you a little more detail again on that model too, how that's changed and what our board will see, what regions secretaries will see this afternoon, along with spring sports and some of those activities, and then finish up with important messages again and our plea for as much data as we can get. We need to know where you're at as schools and how participation is going for you. So with that being said, Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can talk about resources and where to find them.
Great. Good morning, everyone. As we continue to learn a new website and try to manage where information is, especially important in this year where there is just so much information to share with you. We continue to use that right side of your AD dashboard, that MSHSL resources area, for an awful lot of things to share with you. Items on here do go in alphabetical order and not by most recent one, which I do believe is more helpful, but at times you may want to find that most recent one. A couple of the things that we're going to refer to here today, I've marked with red arrows, and while you might not be able to read them, you can at least tell what area they're in. We're going to talk about COVID data collection at the end. A reminder that that is a link called COVID-19 data collection. That both has the form to fill out every 2 weeks, and it's also the page where we share back with you shortly after we receive that information, the results of that information. So you have access to the same pieces that we have there also. The second arrow on here points to a link called Incident Report Forms. And in a few minutes, when I turn it back to Bob, he's going to talk about what is on that page. That page is new, and we referenced it last week in lead that was coming. That is now there also. The third arrow down on the graphic shows public service announcements. And again, we're going to talk about some public service announcements later. You can find those on our website. We have both some general ones as well as some COVID specific ones. And just this week, some actual audio files were added from the NFHS on a number of high school activity type pieces. So if you're doing any type of live broadcasts or things where some of those audio files could actually help you, know that they are also on that public service announcement page. And then the kind of big page, there's a link called Sports Guidance Information, COVID-related resources. That leads to this larger page that I've shown out on the left side. That is that comprehensive list of what we would call everything. That is really intended for ADs to be able to find all of the documents that we've put out throughout the year. It is a very long page as we continue to have people who want things that came out early in the year. And our goal is to put the newest things at the top on that page. Sometimes using a Control F to find things might be helpful, but you'll find that's a long, comprehensive list. Moving on to the next slide. As we put out any document, we continue to think about the fact that there are multiple audiences who care about that. So that single document often gets posted to 3 places. So I think, for example, about the basketball regular season guidance. For you, over on the left here, you'll see that went on your AD dashboard under that sports page. So on that long page of everything, you see the basketball, the wrestling, all of the guidance documents in one place. In the middle on this graphic, you'll see for coaches and also for you as an AD, those documents get put under that blue sports specific band. So if you want just the documents that have come out around basketball, using that blue basketball band on your website will find you just the basketball things. It's also where your coach or your director will find those same documents. And then finally, out on the right-hand side of this graphic, those things do go out on the public pages also. So if you have a parent or a non-logged in user who says, so I want to find those documents also to see what my student needs to be doing, if they go out on the public side without having logged in and go to the basketball page, they'll find that same document. So really our goal continues to be to put out good, useful information. We want to add it to the website once, but then have it show up in a number of places where those are important to different audiences. And the last piece here is just a quick shortcut for you. On your school AD dashboard, you can set bookmarks or favorites on that page. So those pages that you use often, you can make show up at the very top of your dashboard, whether that's your region page, it might be that sport specific page, it might be your school page. And the directions here, number 1, when you're on almost every page on the website, down on the bottom, you'll see a link that says add this page to your dashboard shortcuts. You have to be logged in because only ADs get to do this. But as soon as you see that at the bottom of a page, if you click on that, that will add that page to your dashboard for quick, easy access. And I don't know the exact number, but I do know that on mine right now, I think I have at least 7 pages set, and it's still allowing me to add more. So any kinds of shortcuts that you might want quick access to, use this quick tip to add those to the top of your dashboard and start to personalize that for you. So moving on, I'm going to move this back to Bob in just a second, but he's going to talk a little bit about contest incident reports. And just a reminder that that is a link as he talks about it, that's down under incident report forms. And then Bob's also going to talk a bit about the mask enforcement requirement. And all of these type of documents for you, they are under that sports guidance and information link where you'll find that long list of all of those different documents. So Bob, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk about these documents that they can now find in a better way and talk about what is on it in those documents.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Laura. And those shortcuts, as they know, these documents that we're looking at are 2 shortcuts that I currently have too, and trying to assist you in questions. And if you can go to those documents first, that's always going to save you time and effort in trying to find that information that you're looking for, especially as you're planning for an event. So as we work with our liaisons, as we work you as member schools, we've always had a contest incident report by officials, right? If we have an ejection, the officials fill that out, it comes to us, we send it on to the school that's involved, and they reply, and we know how they reply, and that comes back to us. So what we've done during COVID time here is schools have asked for a way to share with us their experience with another member school or with an opponent. So what we have now is a contest incident report. Laura shared with you as to where you can find that. Once you fill that out, if I'm at Rochester John Marshall and they have difficult with some of my fans from a school that's there, and Brian Erkey says, I think Bob wants to know about this. He's going to fill out that contest incident report form. That's going to come to me because it happened at boys basketball, let's say, and I'm going to send it on to myself in this case to note that our fans were not well behaved, and Mr. Erkey had a difficult time with them down at John Marshall, and I will respond to that. That will come back to me, so I'm able to look at it, make sure that the school knows what occurred and they addressed it, and then it goes on to Mr. Erkey. What you could do as well, if you didn't want to use that contest incident report form, just make sure that Mr. Erkey knows that what occurred, and he would let me know in this scenario. So we can try and resolve this and make it easier for you. And again, try to eliminate those surprises or try to give you a heads up of what's occurring on those teams. And again, as we know, things have been different this week, and I appreciate all your efforts, especially around masks and games. And when we look at enforcement and requirements, again, don't forget where that document is, and that's shown on this slide here as well, and where you can find that and who's responsible for what. Again, great job on your end. There's work yet to be done, right? And some of teams on your own staff or coaches on your own staff where progress needs to be made, but also where you're doing a really nice job on it as well. So we're going to continue to work on our end as well. Eric or Laura, anything I missed here?
No, I just had a question that was sent to me around reporting good things that have happened and how we want that to be done. And I would suggest that with that, it's likely an email back to the administrator at the other school as well as the league to just complement those things so we're aware of those good practices and things that go really well also. And I think this report is really for places where we would identify that things didn't go as well as we would like. So let me know if you think differently on that, Bob.
No, I think you're right, Eric, and it's going to be a common theme here throughout, throughout LEAD here today, that we need to continue to play under the requirements in which we have, right? And that's going to assist us in getting to the end of that winter schedule. And we remember back to the fall and how that ended, right, and where we were at. And let's keep our numbers moving in the right direction as they are with COVID. But as we get our priority, again, getting students back into our buildings, we know that there's increased opportunities for exposure and less control with our environments. This needs to continue to be a priority when guidance calls, right, that we're able to do so and showing that we can do it as we know that we possibly can. So I think that's it. These are, again, both really examples of resources of what you have said would assist you in working with not only other member schools, but your coaches and sports. All right, let's go on to the next, please. Here's a couple other items, really 3 items that have come up where questions where you're maybe having to deal with incidents of their own regarding contests. So number 1, we've heard loud and clear that if you have effective public address announcements that assist you in setting the tone for what the expectations are at a contest, or maybe what you will see at a contest. So the hockey guidance is one example of that, right? Where national anthems, there are some where spectators maybe show up and they're expecting that in the past, you're going to see helmets off during their national anthem and wondering why helmets are on. Remember again that we have said, right? And you can share that in your PA announcements, and Laura shared with you where you can find some of those resources for that, but you should be socially distanced during the national anthem. If teams need to leave their helmets on to be masked during that is acceptable and shows respect as well during COVID times. But again, let's minimize that that physical interaction between teams prior to. Our introductions should look different, and that moves us right on to basketball. So what do your basketball introductions look like? Right. And again, having that consistency so you know what your teams expect when they go to a gym, and also what your opponents expect when they come to yours. So this is right out of the guidance, right? We have said what isn't allowed and what is acceptable. And then what we've said, or what is stated, what the 5 starters will do on the visiting team, they're introduced first and where they go. All right, so if that introduction, much like we said in the fall, looks the same as it always has, that's going to create an issue with some of our schools and our communities, because it's going to look like it goes against what that guidance is. Again, those are requirements, not recommendations. So introductions should look different. We should have our student athletes masked. And again, let's minimize that physical contact during those introductions to make sure that it's reflecting properly with our guidance. If staff doesn't have anything there, I'm going to move on to our next slide here, and I'm going to turn it over to Jody to update us on where we're at with return to sport. Jody?
Thanks, Bob, and good morning, everyone. So the purpose of the return to sport protocol is to safely return students to participation after they have been diagnosed with COVID. This form currently is highly recommended, and it would be recommended that students would see a physician and be cleared prior to their participation. We continue to work with the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee to ensure that students are safely to return. And also, we understand the challenges that schools and you as the athletic administrator may be facing with implementing this process. So over the course of the past few weeks, we've met with the lead liaisons to obtain feedback from them around the current use of the form, whether it's required in their district, the challenges they may be facing. And this feedback has been really incredibly helpful in providing sports medicine with understanding, really how the form is in the trenches, how it's being implemented. The Sports Medicine Advisory Committee is currently looking at updating this form, reviewing new studies. They are looking at best practices from other state associations, and they're listening certainly to that feedback that they've obtained from you all. We have asked the Sports Medicine Advisory to review Bylaw 107. As you can see, this bylaw requires physicians to certify in writing that a student is ready to return after a serious illness. So the question really at hand is COVID deemed a serious illness? And at what, is a mild or asymptomatic case the same as a moderate or a severe case? And how should we be applying Bylaw 107? And finally, should there be a form that's similar to the health questionnaire, and that we're asking parents to fill that health questionnaire out on the years when the physical is not conducted? Should we be looking at some type of form that would allow schools to be assisted by parents when returning students from COVID? So sports medicine has been very busy. We as a league are very fortunate to have this group of physicians and really the entire committee working on our behalf. It's a well-informed committee, and it's really a benefit to our member schools and student athletes. So we will keep you posted. There may be a draft of a new document that will be going to the board for their consideration at next week's meeting. And again, I just wanted to publicly thank lead liaisons for their work on helping to inform us on how that form is currently being used. So that's what I have, Bob.
Great, Jody. And I want to compliment you for the work. Jody is right in between making it practical and a really good resource for you and our sports medicine community, right, that has expectations to make sure that health and safety is of utmost importance during a pandemic. So thanks for your work on that, Jody. And I think you'll continue to see that change, and you'll see a resource that is usable and user-friendly for you and the families moving forward. Let's move on to really important communication as we move forward. And I'm gonna have Eric share some thoughts on this as well, but here's some important upcoming dates before we get into that Model 2, where you see more detail coming to you. And you'll understand in this why we have some detail, but not totally complete in other areas when we talk about the sports, when we look back at Model 2. So this past Monday, postseason guidance went out for speech as an activity. This Thursday, today, we're going to meet with region secretaries to share with them even more detail, right, around postseason guidance, where we're at, and when it can come to you. On the 15th of February, adaptive bowling begins, right? So we have to see where we're at and making sure that that guidance is in place. February 4th, right, where we are at with the number of contests, especially around spring, scheduling, what that looks like. We'll look at that in the grid along with Model 2 as well, giving them the opportunity, our board the opportunity to understand where we're at and take one last look at it, and any action that needs to be taken, that we have the opportunity to do so. On the 22nd of February, you're going to see seasonal guidance, what that looks like in terms of synchronized swimming, also with badminton, with those activities for those that offer it. And then Monday, March 8th, right? Again, this is that spring information. And if we were to create spring guidance right now, we probably wouldn't like it, right? Like, we hope that that spring guidance looks different than the winter guidance. We hope that we make progress towards getting outside, right? And having different opportunities and more flexibility still during COVID, right? So that guidance and things like track and things like baseball, where you need those details, we'll have more of those details that will come out. Monday, March 8th is when we're targeting that information to get to you. Yet to be determined, you're going to see some of our visual arts, the musics, the clay targets, robotics, our summer waiver period, so on and so forth. And again, some of those haven't changed and we're not expecting them to change. Others of those, we have to be ready to pivot again and for change. So again, as we get into that, though, our Model 2 and that postseason and spring conversations, we have to make sure that we get to that point, right? And making sure that we're doing everything we possibly can, as I stated, within that guidance and within our protocols, to continue to keep as many schools possible as playing. And for those that are in quarantine or dealing with COVID, that's a tough place to be. Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you at this time for any further comments around that.
Thanks, Bob. And I think you're right on point when you say our goal right now is to continue our seasons and continue to participate. I think some things that are really important to pay attention to is kind of the priority of in-person education and how much broad support there is for that. And with that, even some things that happen along the way in terms of questions that are being brought forward. So first and foremost, our evidence and information is that our schools are doing it really well with the activities that we have. Sure, we're going to hear when things aren't as good, but the vast majority are doing a really good job, and you as administrators in your programs are critical in making that happen. Since January 4th and our return, I've been sharing that our goal to continue going forward with competition and participation is going to be predicated on our ability to follow our protocols and keep kids safe. And so we're now hearing more of that. We've seen that the CDC has now come out and said that they believe being in person and the value that that brings to students probably outweighs the risks of transmission. And especially when we can do vaccinations for educators and they can be safer in those settings, that's going to be a priority. And that's been a priority here within Minnesota for a number of months. We're also seeing that our numbers across the state are dropping now finally below the 50 mark for the majority of our schools. Remember back in October, if you were 50 or over, that was deemed a time to completely shut down. And so we're making some progress in that. In conversations with the Department of Health, they're now saying that the number of phone calls and messages outweigh the ones that are saying, somebody's not doing masks very well, are now outweighing those that are saying we shouldn't be wearing masks. And so we're seeing a tide turning even in those kinds of conversations. And again, with our goal to have our seasons, we need to be really focused on that. This past week, an article came out in the Journal of American Medical Association talking about the priority of in-school education and then bringing into question about how that fits with having athletics. And is that a good plan or not a good plan? Even this week, Dr. Michael Osterholm, who's an incredible expert on epidemiology, had some of the same questions. And they weren't saying we can't do it, but it's going to be imperative that we continue to do it really well as we go forward. And this is an early plug for that data. We are the best source of data in terms of how students participate of any group out there. And so we're going to need that, and Laura will remind us of that as we get to the end of this. But just wanted to make sure and share some of those situations and what's going on. So even as numbers get better, we cannot suffer from that COVID fatigue, and make sure that we do it as well as possible within all of our programs. And thanks so much for everything that you've done to this date and continue to do within your schools. So Bob, with that, I'll send it back to you. I know we've got scheduling and models to look at.
Yeah, important information that everybody here is going to want. And again, what our board is going to see, what region secretaries are going to see. And I'm really going to start with postseason here at the bottom, if I could. And Laura and Eric and Jody, if there's anything that doesn't make sense, right, please make sure stop me. Let's stop me at each sport just for clarification. So starting with girls and boys basketball with where we're at, you can see the weeks in which we're anticipating those postseason experiences to end, right? And state being really a 2-week period of time. And I've said to you, I believe before, when we think about 32 state quarterfinal contests, most likely in 2 games, staying away from Good Friday and Easter weekend if possible, you're going to see in that week of March 29th, that's where we're going to try and get those 32 quarterfinal games. Again, really, that format to be determined, sites still to be determined with the number of sites. Is it 16? Is it 8? Can we play more contests at one site? Do we have students at those sites? Those are all things that Lisa and I are working on. I think what you will see here in boys and girls basketball, again, that week of March 15th, I believe at one time that was green for our smaller classes, right? For our class 1A and 2A especially, where you're seeing large numbers of schools in your sections, we need to turn those dates over to our region secretaries, to the tournament managers, so they have time to complete those tourneys. Whereas if you're in a section where you have 8 contests or 8 teams, you're going to have less section games. You may get time during that week of 15th where you could do a regular season contest where maybe your section hasn't started yet. We'll say this as well. That would mean then that week of March 1st and March 8th, those are 2 weeks prior to the end, that you would have more flexibility, right? Going from 2 contests to 3 contests that were allowed. Again, we caution you on that, right? And we're starting to hear with schools where they're going to play less games, getting closer to that end in trying to minimize, again, exposure and number of contests. If contact tracing does occur, right, that you have an option to play during postseason. So we know that you're at different places in participation, what your school's experienced, but let's be really careful and planful about what the end of those seasons look like to give your student athletes and your teams an opportunity to get to postseason. I'm going to work my way up to boys and girls hockey if there aren't any comments or questions there from our staff. As we get into boys and girls hockey, you're seeing again when that will end. All right, that week of March 29th, that those will conclude together. Remember this, we have less teams in girls hockey than we do in boys hockey. I believe all of our sections are 8 teams or less. So you're going to see an elongated period of time for a state tournament for girls hockey, which means that we're probably going to have quarterfinals at some point in time during that week of March 22nd, which then shows for girls hockey that they're going to have a compressed period of time, most likely 3 games in a week, 4 sections for girls hockey. All right, so that week of the 15th, you're seeing a compacted or a compressed time for girls hockey through that week. Whereas boys hockey, who has more teams in sections, a 2-week period of time that'll be utilized for sections. And again, a shorter period of time, no less games, but we'll have the same amount of games compressed into a smaller period of time for state. So the state tournament itself for boys hockey looks like it will be all within that week of March 29th. Gymnastics, you're going to see 1 week for sections and 1 week for state. Know this, that when we get into wrestling and when we get into alpine and Nordic skiing, we aren't as far along right now. And in some cases, it's complicated, right? So less details around wrestling, but we still have 2 weeks blocked off there. Again, identifying that week of March 22nd for a state experience as to what that will look like for wrestling. I think alpine skiing has more detail. We continue to work on sites and places and dates, but anticipating 2 weeks for sections with a week for state. Nordic skiing, again, probably less detail, more to work on what that looks like. But again, 1 week for sections, 1 week for state. Dance, this really hasn't changed. So that week of March 8th, we're indicating that Friday, Saturday for jazz and kick will be the dates and times, or times to be determined, but the dates for state. And then if you have dance, that your team would dance on one of those 2 Saturdays, the week of the 22nd of February or the week of March 1st, on those Saturdays for section dance tournaments. So I'm going to pause and take a breath there. Eric, Laura, Jody, what did I miss? Again, any updates that I missed as to where we're at on this draft or modified Model 2 schedule for the winter?
Bob, I believe you skipped past swimming and diving as you were moving up the row. Swimming and diving is also here as a 1 week of section and 1 week of state.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Laura. I did. And Lisa's has a good plan in place. Details yet to be taken care of. Working on that site, finalizing that site to make sure that that is available and looks like it will fit with the format as well. Anything else from winter before we get into the spring?
Bob, I would just offer that with wrestling and in working with that group, and they're doing an outstanding job. Keep in mind that we haven't done any individual type of invitationals or tournaments. So that creates a really unique challenge in how we try to do that safest and best. But the timeframes that are shown there, I believe to be very accurate. We believe that there will be 2 weeks set aside for sections as they have been in the past, and that the state will be focused on 1 week. So while the format isn't firm or solid at this time, I think that those dates are very solid.
All right, I'm going to move on to spring then. Spring has been modified a bit. And again, this is, I believe at the top, it shows that it's a draft. You're going to see that our region secretaries, or that our region secretaries will have that conversation this afternoon. And then we'll also walk through really where the changes currently are at. And so the traditional starts have always been there. All of a sudden I can't see the model here. Sorry about that. But where you're going to see changes, where there's 2 weeks, and that quite often at the beginning of the season, you're able to play on that second Thursday, right? So that salmon colored area has now been shortened, anticipating that if you look at baseball and softball, for an example, if weather permits, that you're playing on that second Thursday, really 2 weeks as identified within bylaw 502, that you're able to participate on that second Thursday and where that would fit. So at one point in time, that salmon was through that entire week. You're going to see that shortened here as of right now. And again, when you look at the number of weeks, Laura, do we have that grid available that we've looked at with Model 2? So let's not forget some things here. All right. So within those weeks, there's assumptions that can be made, right? And what we've said for our spring seasons, which is down on the bottom half of this grid. So if you look at the number of weeks that we have versus the number of contests, there's going to be an assumption made that it's going to be more than 2 contests per week, right? Otherwise, there's not enough weeks to get in, to fit in only 2 contests a week to get, for instance, to 20 games for a baseball or softball, right? So again, this goes back to return to participation, that this is something that we were identifying, trying to hold our spring sport as firm as they were in the past, that what they missed last spring, even though it may be less weeks, right, in totality, that they're getting those number of contests in. What we know right now is that things like tournaments or invites are not a possibility for the winter. If that were to carry forward, that means those would not be opportunities in the spring. But again, we do not know that right now. What we do know that you could have a try of sorts, and let's say if that were to be a baseball try of sorts, that you may have two contests with three teams involved. But again, the possibility for tournaments and or invitationals is not the case right now in the winter season, but we haven't said that for the spring. I think the glaring sport where everybody has questions around, there might be two of them, but track tends to be the most popular question right now with what those will look like, either for tournaments and or invitationals, as we would say quite often in track. So think back to that progression timeline of communication and when we're going to know when that guidance becomes available, right? So right now, otherwise, we're hoping and wishing as to what would happen in the spring. And I'd be very careful how you plan. If your track meets look very much like they did a year ago, that's going to be difficult because there weren't meets, right? But if it were 2 years ago and we have large numbers of teams and large numbers of kids in one setting at one school, that is going to be difficult at this time to imagine, right? So less teams, less participants, how that looks in track, it is going to have to look different than it has in the past, but I'm confident we'll be able to get there. And your creativity will allow those experiences as well, where we will be able to participate in those sports, just not looking like maybe it did 2 years ago. Just a quick reminder, right up at the top with the winner as well, that we're at 2 contests per weeks, right? Until we get to the last 2 weeks. If you have 3 contests on your schedules prior to the last 2 weeks, somebody's going to know and find out or hear about that. Just very naturally when they're trying to schedule contests. There has not been exceptions to that. More sometimes means less, right? So packing 3 contests into a week right now with the COVID outbreak in one of those communities is going to mean less games or no games for 2 weeks for the communities involved. So if you have greater than 2 contests, that cannot occur. That should not occur, right? That's required right now until the last 2 weeks of the regular season. And you will see that the last 2 weeks in some cases of the regular season may have shifted, right? What's green maybe now went to sections. And again, if there's freedom or flexibility that changes, that you're able to utilize, we will let you know that as soon as we possibly can, and any modifications that may take place. So again, I'm going to take a breath here. Laura, Eric, Jody, anything I missed in that spring season around the start and or in the grid and what those number of contests look like versus the number of weeks?
Bob, I'm just going to tag in on what you just mentioned about scheduling and recognize that in wrestling, the priority is scheduling tries in order to be able to maximize the number of contests given what our restrictions are. Should you have a team that's unable to participate in a try, that is a decision that you and the schools involved are going to have to make about whether or not the other 2 teams have that contest. And if you do, that's fine. But remember that counts as one of the dates. And so to try to schedule that team that was not able to participate at a later time would take another date. And so we are still restricted to the number of dates of 16 and a total contest of 32. So just be really thoughtful about that. In some cases, you're going to take the one opponent if you can. In other cases, you might say, we're going to move the entire try to another date so everyone gets their maximum number of matches. So just wanted to also remind people of that, because that might be a try thing for wrestling only, but then it also might be impactful in some of our other sports that allow 3 teams at a time together.
Great, thanks, Eric. And I appreciate that has been a question when it comes to wrestling. If we could, anything else, Laura, there maybe I missed on spring or with the grid?
Let me get back there. I think you addressed, Bob, that we had split these weeks in half to show the actual start date of that Thursday of the second week for a potential contest.
Correct. Yep, that is correct. And I think we have purposefully not addressed the end of the spring season yet, right? Because there's going to be, there is still detail that needs to be worked through on that. Some sports are further along based on facilities and such. But the focus on that start of that spring season is where things are really taking shape. And again, back to what Laura showed on the progression, we're going to have these conversations with the region secretaries again this afternoon with the winter, but also then into that spring season, if there's anything we haven't identified yet, that the board has that opportunity for that. That being said, let's move on to the end, and we are at, we're over here today already. So we're going to wrap up here closely. Moving forward, we need that data, right? Again, to tell us how you're doing, who's playing, who isn't playing. Maybe we have some that haven't started yet, and we know that. We feel for you, and we want to assist in any way that we possibly can to be able to do so. As you find COVID interruptions, do not forget that resource, right? So if a community is not comfortable playing a team that has a number of exemptions on their team, for instance, remember, go back to that resource as to what that would mean. It would be no contest in that case, but that is another resource that we shared very early on. As you're experiencing those things, utilize those resources. And as always, we're willing to assist with the best of our ability. Keep up the great work. Please remember that next week, due to our board meeting on the 4th, that lead will come to you on Friday at 10:45. So that being said, we're going to let you get back to getting ready for games here and practices tonight. Thanks again for joining us on lead this week. Keep up the great work, and let's continue to make progress.